Risk monitoring. The last stage of the risk management process is risk monitoring. It involves keeping an eye on risks and implementing risk response plans whenever any risk occurs. Monitoring risks and documentation. Updating the risk register. The risk register needs to be regularly reviewed and updated throughout the risk monitoring process. This ensures that the project team is aware of the potential risks and ready to implement the planned responses as required. Every time a risk response is executed, the risk register has to be updated with the information on the action taken by the project team. The project team needs to evaluate whether their risk responses worked well or not. Lessons learned from the current project or similar past projects will provide insight into whether implemented risk responses were effective or not. If it seems that a different risk response was necessary, then the project team should update the risk register accordingly. In case a similar risk reoccurs, this update will help the project team to respond with a more appropriate plan in the future. Reserve analysis. Many projects will have contingency funds or project reserves. The reserves will help the project deal with risk events and cost overruns. The project team will regularly conduct reserve analysis as part of the risk monitoring process. Reserve analysis is simply a matter of checking to see how much project reserve remains and how much might be needed more to deal with outstanding project risks. Technical performance analysis. Technical performance analysis uses project data to compare planned versus actual completion of technical requirements of the project. The analysis will reveal whether there is any variance between actual technical performance and what was planned. Any negative variance could indicate potential new risks for the project. Re-evaluation of risk identification process. The project team may sometimes need to re-evaluate or redo its risk identification process. The re-evaluation could be done as a response to unfavorable signs or extraordinary circumstances. For example, if a project significantly deviates from its budgetary baseline frequently, this may imply the team has missed some major risks during the risk identification process. In such circumstances, the team will have to reevaluate or redo the previously completed risk identification process. Monitoring and executing risk response plan. Without an effective risk monitoring process, even the best risk response plans will fail. Effective risk monitoring is a prerequisite for the successful execution of risk response plans. Monitoring the risk triggers. A risk trigger is an indication that a risk is about to occur or has occurred. Risk triggers may be discovered during the risk identification process and monitored as the project is executed. Triggers help to recognize indications that a risk event is imminent. Once the risk trigger occurs, the project team needs to execute the risk response strategies and plans. Management of the risk impact. When a risk occurs, its impact or consequence may sometimes differ what the project team predicted. Actual consequence of a risk could be more or less than what was predicted. If the actual consequence of a risk is less severe than what was predicted, the project team may change the way they will respond to that risk. The team will document their experience in dealing with the risk. This will help the team to manage the risk better in case the same risk reoccurs in the future. The project team may often find that the actual consequence of a risk was more severe than what was predicted. In such circumstances, the team may have to take additional or different responses than what was planned before. Risk review. The project team needs to evaluate the effectiveness of the risk responses implemented by them. This effort is part of the risk review process. The risk review process will also identify risks that are no longer relevant to the project. Closing irrelevant risks allows the team to focus on managing the risks that are still open. Risk reviews will also identify new risks and secondary risks. Secondary risks. Frequently, a response to one risk will create the possibility of new risks that would otherwise not have occurred. This is known as secondary risk. Let us assume a project team did not have the technical expertise to complete a part of the project activity. The team considered their inexperience as a risk or weakness to complete that activity successfully. So, as a response, they decided to outsource the part of the activity to a supplier. However, there was a secondary risk that the supplier might go out of business. This was not a risk to the project prior to the outsourcing decision. The discovery of secondary risks would require additional risk response planning by the project team. For example, the team might consider alternative suppliers to complete the said activity if the original supplier goes out of business. Workarounds. Project team may not have the response plans ready in advance for a low impact and low probability risks. But sometimes these non-critical risks can suddenly become critical. Sometimes even a new risk can emerge for which there was no response plan. These are examples of circumstances which will force the project team to consider workarounds. Workarounds are unplanned responses developed to deal with the occurrence of unanticipated project risks.